so much, and we can do something like this. So I do have some nice little code snippets here, save some typing, and I'm going to have this get logged in username, get roles, and get user security. Okay, now here's how I like to work it. This is nice if you just want the username. What it will do is call out to this security repository, and that security repository is actually going to be responsible for returning the username. So I like my WCF or ASMX or even REST APIs to be like that, literally one-liners, maybe two. Because I don't believe in putting all the code in your service. It's a gateway into your back end. So we have kind of a little security object that we're going to get to in just a sec. Now that security object is simply going to return the username as a string. Now that's really basic, right? I also have one here you can see called get roles, which is, I'll come back to this guy in the next section. It's going to return these. Now the reason I like to do this, the gentleman up here was talking with me about membership providers. Some of you may use groups though. Quite a few of you raised your hand when I said who uses groups. So what I'm going to do is make it so that I don't really care what you're using. You could just switch out that security repository, and it could be membership, it could be Windows, it doesn't really matter. You could even do custom if you'd like. And then we're going to call back into that. All right, so what I'm going to do is, this project already has quite a bit done. This is that one I ran at the beginning. So I'm going to open up a starter project and kind of start from scratch, I guess you could say, on the kind of whole thing. All right, so this project right now doesn't have a user details object. It doesn't have a security service. It doesn't have really anything. It just has the same project structure. That's the one I ran earlier. Okay, so I'm going to come back down, and we'll come into our services. And let me go ahead and add that guy back in. So we'll do a new, same thing I just did, but that was in the one project. So let's add it. We'll call this security service. All right, and I'm going to re-add in those methods I just saw. And what we're going to do now is actually focus on the back end, though, of this. So let me get back my WCF operations. There we go. I'm going to resolve a couple namespaces. If you're wondering how it's doing that, that's ReSharper. Some of you probably use ReSharper. Okay, see this user security object here? We could make a method that returns the username and then a separate method that returns the roles, but that gets a little chatty because now for each thing I want to do, I got to call it at least at a minimum twice to get the roles and to get the username. So what I like to do is I have this just really simple, I got to make it here, but it's called user security object that I highlighted. And what it does is it has the username and the roles. So it's very simple. So let me go in to my model project. I'm going to add a new class called user security. All right, now this guy just has two simple properties, so I'm going to whip these out really fast. And we're going to do username, and we're going to do list of role, and call that roles. All right, so that is going to be my user security. So all I'm doing is batching up the operation. You know, there's no need to be chatty. Why not just get everything you need for that user at once? All right, so let's come back into here. And now my user security is good. But now I need these guys. I need to get roles, and I need to get user security. And there's different ways to do this. So I'm going to talk about kind of both. So I'm just going to right-click here and generate a stub for both of these. So it gets us our methods. And we'll go ahead and navigate to that. All right, need to mark these guys as public. Don't have to actually, but I'm going to. And for now on the roles, here, I'm going to go ahead and just return null. We'll come back to that in the next part of the session. Okay, now get user security is going to be really easy though. I just made a user security object, so we're going to go ahead and say return new user security object. And we'll go ahead and do a default object initializer here. And this is the one that has username. And I'm going to use something I already have, which we're going to come back to. So I'm going to call this get op context username. I'll explain what that is in just a moment. For roles, I'm going to say get roles. which right now returns null, but we'll come back. So you have a couple options here. When the web service gets called, and they want to get a user security object, we're just going to forward that to this class I'm in. Good reuse pattern. In here, we're going to return this user security object. Okay, that's pretty basic. But how do you get the, what's the best way to get the name? Okay, now I know a lot of you in here have probably done HTTP context.current.user.identity.name, and we could do that right there. That's what we could do. The challenge is Silverlight also supports TCP, and that's not HTTP. So HTTP context is kind of a different ballgame. Well, WCF provides this operation context, and I suspect several have probably used it if you've done any WCF at all. If you haven't, think of it like the HTTP context kind of on steroids. All right, it gives you access to a little bit more than you would have had otherwise. So all I'm doing here is getting to an object. Once I get operation context.current, I'm getting to this object called service security context. That has a sub-object hanging off of it, which is Windows identity. Now, based on however you're logged in, whether it's TCP, HTTP, or some other thing Silverlight supports in the future, WCF will automatically translate and get you the credentials for the user. Now again, HTTP, if that's all you're doing, that would be absolutely fine right there. But I chose to go with a little bit more flexible pattern. So that gets returned, that literally just returns a string, very basic at this point. Okay, now get roles we're going to come back to, so that's going to be the next part. But I hope everybody sees, first off, that all we're doing is Silverlight's going to call to the server. It's going to get this data, and it's going to return it back out as a string, but we're going to wrap that call to make it less chatty in a user security object. All right. So let's switch back over. Let's talk about roles now, because that's probably what a lot of you actually cared about. Okay, we obviously need to go in and provide a way to get to the user's roles. So what do? Well, we'll talk about that as well. Okay, number one, we could pass the roles into the init params. I just showed you guys how to do that with the username. Okay, now that's where I draw the line. You know, it's like I'm pretty flexible in the username. But if you're passing the roles into that and they're raw in the page, that gets pretty easy to hack. And now if I know, I start guessing that, maybe they called it admin. So I try that. I hack it into the page. Well, now I'm in the admin role, if that's what you base it on. So I don't really like that approach, but you could. The approach we're going to do is we're going to build on what we already have, which is our security service. And the security service is going to grab either the Active Directory roles, the membership provider roles, whatever the roles are that you guys store in your database. Get those in a list of role object, which I'll show you just in a bit, and then return that in that user security object. That way it's literally like ASP.NET would do, or Windows Forms. It's just it's a little more custom. All right? So this is what I'm going to do, something like this, except for we're going to have a lot more code down there. But we're going to go in, and we already have a get roles in our web service. You already saw that in the WCF. From there, we're going to come down, and get roles here is in the security repository again. I like to break all that out for reuse. It's going to actually take the op context. Now, I passed it in. You'll notice there I passed in the operation context. You don't have to do that. I just wanted to show, for those that are new to this, that operation context is something that's part of WCF. But you're going to see I'm not going to actually do it quite that way. Okay, from here, I can get the username, and if I was doing membership provider, I can then load all the roles based on that username. If I'm doing Active Directory, it's a little more involved. It's not bad, but a little bit more involved. Not too bad to work with. So let me talk about how we can access roles in our application here. All right, so going back to here, my get roles currently is empty. And obviously we need to return a list of roles. Now let me show you what my simple role class is. This list of role, that's all it has. And I'm not even going to use the role ID here. But if for some reason you wanted to track IDs of each role, like in the database scenario, you certainly could. I am going to use the role's name. And I'm going to show you a nice little trick to get to the current logged in Windows authenticated roles, which is, it's actually harder than, you know, with forms authentication, it's pretty easy because you're typically hitting a database, and that's just standard code to hit a database. With Windows authentication, there's 3 techniques, at least that I know of, to get a user's roles from the current logged in, what we call iIdentity object. Okay, one is hacky, but I see people do it. One is you could go in and use reflection to get into the iPrincipal object, which holds the roles of the user, because that's a private field that stores the array of roles. It works. You could do it. I even have some code back at the office that does it, but there's a better way, I think. That's one way, though, is you could use reflection, pass in the iIdentity object, and then get to that user's roles from that once you get to the iPrincipal. The second option, you could use directory services. Is anybody programmed against system.directory services? Okay. Well, you guys raising your hand. I won't say it's the most fun C# or VB you'll ever write. If you like getting COM exceptions, you'll love it. It's awesome. Because it's all COM-based behind the scenes. But that is an option. You can pass in the username, and you can get back the roles. The third option is the easiest of those three, and I think it's probably the one I would recommend overall. And that is, we can use the operation context. There's some kind of lesser known stuff we can do here. So let me show you what that looks like. So if we want to get the roles, ultimately I need a roles variable here. And this is going to get a little bit long, so I'm going to try to wrap it. Hopefully you guys can see it pretty well there. And what I want to do is we'll do that, and then down here, I don't want to forget to return my roles. We're going to do this. We're going to say operation context, operation, oh please. Who was my typer I volunteered out there? There he is, right there. Okay, dot current. I'm going to wrap to the next line so you guys can kind of see it. Now, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to get to the security context, dot Windows identity, dot groups. Now, if that's all we did, that would be really easy. That would be so cool if that's all we had to do. It's not quite that simple. Okay, this returns an iIdentity reference collection. Silverlight doesn't have any idea what that object is because we're on the server side. So you can't just return that out and hope that Silverlight will magically figure it out. It won't. I'm here to tell you. I tried. Okay, so we're going to do groups, but what I need to do is ultimately iterate through the groups and put them into a list of my role object, right, which just had the role ID and the name. Pretty basic. So the way we're going to do that is just a real simple lambda. So we're going to come in and say select each group, do a lambda, and then what we want to return here, ultimately, I'll come back to that, is a list. And that's what we're going to want to work with, okay, in that list. So what I'm going to do here is when we go in, we're going to do just a new role. We're going to set the name equal to. Now here's where it gets a little tricky. This is one of those that's like, how would you know to do that type things? The answer is you got to go break down and actually read the help docs. I know that's rough, but every now and then that's what we got to do. So the group that's being passed in here, because if you're new to lambdas, all I'm doing is saying basically loop through all the groups, pass in each one, name it G, and now I'm going to process that each group. You have to do a kind of little wacky syntax here. You have to say g.translate type of nt account. Now again, that's one of those where you go, how the heck would you know to do that? You would. I'm telling you. And this will be in the sample code. Okay, so that will actually get the group's name. You are basically, in essence, think of it almost like casting to an NT account, and then when we do toString on it, we get the role name back. One of those not so obvious things, I will admit. But it works very well. This is why I say with the membership provider stuff, this is where you would simply take the username, call the database, get back the array of roles, and you're done. It's actually easier, I think. Well, if you're comfortable with databases. In here, you've got to know a little bit more. Okay, so what this will do now is that little bit of code right there will take care of getting our roles for us. And so now we have our roles. We have a nice little workable collection of roles. But when you run these roles, you'll get your domain/role group, right? And on the Silverlight side, I really could care less about the domain, at least in my situations with the client. I just want the name of the role. So I made a real simple little method up here called trim domain that literally just strips off the domain, so you just have the group name, the role. Makes it a little bit easier to work with. So I'm just going to wrap g.translate with that guy. All right, and that'll just give me the friendly names, if you will, of our roles. And that's it. That's the process. So again, this is code that if you go do a search on Stack Overflow or any of that, you'll find this code all over the place. It's the same thing. But I will say it's one of those things I wouldn't have guessed. I mean, who would have thought, oh yeah, g.translate, that makes perfect sense, right? Anybody? If you've done it before, but it wasn't obvious to me when I first did it a while back. All right, so now we have a way to get our user security. It calls into get roles. Get roles calls into here. The underline's resharper, by the way, saying you could do some different things, but we're going to leave that. And we're pretty much done. So we can get the username. We can get the operation context username. That's my private one that's reused across that guy and across this guy. There's get operation context name. All right. So now we have a way to get the roles. Now what do we do? Well, let me go in, and let's first off, let's see if we can build. And all right, that's always good. That doesn't mean it's going to work, but hey, building's the first step to self-help, right? All right, and I usually like to, just to make sure there's no weirdness going on. Let's try to pop that guy up. You'll notice it's authenticating me. In fact, let me show you real quick why that is, in case you haven't seen it. The reason that the app itself is authenticating, right now, I'm using Cassini, just the built-in one. But when we get done, I'll show you some IIS Express, which is very cool. If you haven't done it before, this is kind of the, what I'll call poor man's way of doing NT authentication with Cassini. It's limited, but it works. If you come in and right-click on your web project, go to the web tab, you'll see this NTLM authentication on the user development server there. That's the magic. Okay. Now, you'll see coming up, well, let me ask, how many have done a WCF service here and then moved it to dev or staging and everything broke? Anybody had that situation? And you had to go dig into the config files and figure out how to make it work and all that fun? All right, well, I'm going to show you all that. If you haven't suffered through that and beat your head against the monitor, I'll hopefully save you that, a couple brain cells. At least that's the goal, but we'll see what happens. All right, so we're in our get roles. Looks like we're pretty good there. Now we're going to switch to the client side. So let me go back here real quick. And now we're going to start using some of this stuff to hopefully do something useful. All right, so now in Silverlight, we obviously need a way to call this service. Now that's pretty easy. If you haven't done it before, you just create a proxy, go through the proxy, and call your service. But I wanted to make something that was MVVM compatible, that notified me when the security was available, and made it just really kind of dead simple to use across really any Silverlight app. So what I made is a class called Security Manager, and that's what we're going to talk about right here. All right, so ask yourself this question. So how do you access and manage usernames and roles within your Silverlight app? And those that have done it, you'll know that it's not that straightforward because, like I said when I started the talk, I can't get directly to those. So what are you going to do? Well, that's what this class here is going to do. So what we really need is kind of a couple things. Number one, we need a class capable of calling the service. All right, that's pretty easy. Now I'm going to show you a cool little trick to do that, though. Those of you using WCF calls right now are probably writing a lot of wrapper methods to call your different operations on the server. So I'm going to show you one method to rule them all. It's not a ring, but it works. So it's going to be called call service. We'll get to that in just a bit. So the security manager is going to be the answer to this question. There's many ways to do this, but this works very, very well. So the security manager itself is simply a Silverlight class that can call the service, but it does a lot more than that. It also will store the properties, or sorry, the roles. It stores the username. It will do the is user in role type functionality that we're used to in ASP.NET or Windows Forms. It'll even check if the user's in any role. You could pass in 3 roles and say, hey, is the user in any of these? Because if they are, they should have access to X. And then we could show a link or whatever it may be. Well, this particular security class is going to do those things. So it's going to provide a way to access the service. It's going to determine the user roles based on what it gets back. That's our user security class that you guys already saw. It's going to determine access to the view. This is really important. I'll come back to this, but let me mention it now. when I first did this type of thing with Silverlight, it was for this client we were working with. They had all kinds of roll checks. I mean, literally in one screen, there could be like 10 roll checks. You know, don't show this, don't show this, show this. It was pretty involved. And so I sat down, I was all proud, you know, I got it working great, I got all the roles integrated in, stuff's showing and hiding. And then I thought one day, I go, wait a sec, because I was using the navigation framework in Silverlight. Some of you are probably using that. And I thought, wait a sec, what if I type in a view that I hid the link for it, so they can't get to it, but one of you guys are smart enough to figure that out. You could A, download the zap and decompile it, look at it. It's just a zip file, right? And I said, well, what if I type in up on the URI in the browser, what if I actually go in and type in like admin, if that's one of the screens? And boom, I got right to the screen. I went, oh, crap. That's not good, right? Because they couldn't click on a link to get to it, but if they're savvy enough, the navigation framework tracks what you're on up on top, which is supposed to be a benefit. In this case, it was a curse. Okay, so I'm going to show you that as well, how we can deal with that and make some custom URI access checkers so that a really smart guy or girl out there can't hack your system without you realizing it. All right. So this security manager class, this is kind of the high-level view of it. I took everything out, and I just want to focus on a couple things, and this is why I'm going to build a few of these pieces anyway. I know you'd love me to type everything, but, you know, not going to happen. Number one, you'll notice it has an event there called user security loaded. Well, I needed a way that once it calls to that service we just built, how do you know that the data came back, right? Because it's all asynchronous. So that's pretty standard, just like a proxy would do. So that is going to raise an event, and you'll see how I use it in just a bit, that we're going to use to say, okay, we got the roles, we got the user, now let's do our thing and work with it. Okay, the is user security load complete there. Not the world's longest known property, but fairly close, I think. It is obviously going to be used. Once you download the data, it'll be marked. It's just a flag that says, yeah, I got the data. And that way we don't have to constantly be monitoring that event to come back. Because what might happen is you might have a main screen, a view, that has subviews, right? User controls. Well, the main view might have already caused this to load, and this already has the data in it, so the subviews don't need to sit there and wait for the event. It's never going to happen. They're already fired. So this will be a flag we can check to say, hey, have we already loaded our data? So I'll show you that. Now, the three at the bottom I want to point your attention to, and I'll show you the code for this in just a sec, but get user security details and check user access to URI. Really important. The get user security details is what we're going to use to call the service. Okay, that's going to be pretty, standard proxy code. The check user access to URI, this is the one where I had that aha moment where I typed in admin and I got right to the screen and went, oh, that's not good. This is going to be the one that will actually monitor as the URI changes. We're going to check what role the user's in and filter even at the view level what they can get to. Okay, so I'll show you that guy. And then finally, the last two actually there, user is in role. That's pretty standard. You guys are all used to that if you've done ASP.NET or Windows Forms. The last one I added, though, it came in handy. Sometimes you just need to know, is the user in any of these roles? You know, you have admin, editor, designer, whatever it may be. It sounds like SharePoint, actually, but anyway. You're in those type of roles. And you want to work with those and say, are they in any of those? Because if they are, they can get to X. Okay, so I also have it's a little link query I'll show you that does this and works with it. Now, we'll stop there. We're going to come back to this in just a second. So let's switch gears now in our demo, and let's switch to our security manager. So I'm going to close these guys out now that they build. Now, I mentioned at the start of the talk, I have a service agents project. Okay, the service agent has a security service agent. Now let me show you what that is, because this has a really cool little method. This guy right here literally probably has saved me thousands, I don't know how many thousands of lines of code. Okay, now I still need to make the proxy. That's why that's red right there. I'll make that in just a bit. What ended up happening is, and we're going to take a quick segue, but it relates to what we're talking about. is if I needed to call get user security on the back end, then typically in my view model, I would write a get user security method, which calls the proxy, handles the async callback, right? If I wanted to go in and call a get people, get jobs, get this, get that, it's the same thing. Just the name that you call changes. It's always completed event arcs. It's always completed as the event name. Just the first part of the name changes. So I was thinking one day, and I just was like, I'm sick of writing these calls because number one, it's making my zap size a little bit bigger because I have all this code I got to write, and number two, for whatever reason, the more code I write, the more bugs I have. I haven't figured that out yet, but it's just how it is. And anyway, long story short, I won't bore you with the details. It'll be in the sample code. But what this does is this is the one method to rule them all. Okay, this will call any service. Now, in this case, I actually hard-coded the proxy, which we got to make again. Don't let me forget that. And what we're going to do is fire up the proxy. I dynamically give it the binding and the endpoint to call. Okay, that's all up in a base class. So that just figures out the endpoint address dynamically based on convention. And then what I do, this is the magic right here, and it's not that fancy, is they can pass in a call service of T. The one thing you can always know that has the name on the front of it is the event arcs. Get user security completed event arcs, right? So if I strip off completed event arcs, I know the name of the action to call on the WCF service. So what I do is I go in, and that's exactly what happens. I grab the type, grab the name of it, and say, let's strip off completed event args and replace it with just string.empty. Now that gives me the name of the operation to call, or the action, I call it. Then I use a little reflection here to dynamically hook up the event to a callback and to dynamically call the service. Now the first thing people say when they see this is, how's the performance? Because I am using some reflection. Let's just say that this app is a very heavily used app for it's a multi-million-dollar construction company, and they've had zero performance impact by doing this. So that's my best performance test, is the customer hasn't complained. Let me check my phone. They might have now, but but anyway, it's been very performant actually. So just in case, because I know some people say reflection, you know. All right. So anyway, this is going to be used now by my security manager to call that service. So let's create the proxy so we can actually do that. So I'm going to come into my service agents, and ultimately what I want to call this is security proxies. That'll be my namespace. So let's come in. We'll add a service reference, discover, come into here. There's my service. Okay, there's those three methods you guys saw. And then I'm just going to call it security proxies. That's just my namespace. So just be simple. And this will generate our proxy, and hopefully we'll be on our way. So there we go. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to now that I have a way to call the service, and I already have a security service agent that can call the service, now I need to make the call. So again, we're now switching gears. For those that are new to this, we're now on the Silverlight side, right? It's going to look like the server side, but it's the Silverlight side. We're in now what's called a view model. Now let me give it just a 30-second intro to view models. For those that, because several of you raised your hands. I know some experts are in here probably, but I like everybody to leave feeling you got something out of it. Okay, so number one way to write Silverlight code is you could just use the code behind. A lot of you are probably doing that if you're brand new to us. The other approach is, well, how about we segregate out the code into a separate reusable class called a view model. Now, oftentimes the view model is not that reusable, to be real honest. But it's a way to break our code out so that it's not tied into the XAML in our Silverlight. That allows us to now do better testing. If something breaks and your best buddy goes on vacation that wrote that code, that you think their code's horrible, at least you know where to go and all that. Versus, let's scroll through 2,000 lines of code behind code. You know, so it's a way to break it out. So what I did is in my view models project, I'm going to open a view model in just a sec. But you'll notice in here I have something called a security manager. That's the thing I've been talking about. Now, I made an interface for it. Don't be too concerned about that. Mainly so that you could substitute in things if you're into testing, that you could mock it, we call it. But moving on down, here is my security manager. So I need, when the constructor is called, to call this get user security details. So let me go ahead and write that real quick. This is going to actually call that proxy, which will call the service, get back the data, and then we're going to store it with this one call here. So we'll say public void that guy. And now what I need to do is this security service agent that's already in my security manager. That's the class I just showed you that has the call service in it. Okay, so it's my data fetcher, if you will, because I didn't want to put that code in here. I want to make it reusable across my whole project. So to do that, we're just going to simply say, let's grab that name actually, security service agent. There's my call service. Now I have to give it what is the type I want to call. We want to call the get user security method, so I'm going to give it the completed event args. That will strip off that completed event args in the method. Now I know the name of the method. And then we're going to come in. Let me give a little room here. Just got to write a little code inside. Let me back that. Come over here. All right, this is going to pass us back the sender and the event args. And we want to go ahead and do the processing of that right here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to say is user security load complete. At this point, that would be true. Okay, because we called the service with that one line of code. It comes back. We handle it in line with a Lambda. And then we say, yeah, I'm done. That lets any other of the view models know that we've already loaded our data. Okay, number two, we need to, in this class, assign the username and the role. So let me show you that real quick. So I have a little properties, because once again, I know y'all wanted to sit here and watch me write properties, right? So fun. Is admin, is user and role, and several others. But there's one down here, is user security load complete. And we also have, let's see, where'd he go? There it is, right there. Username, user roles. So this is the data that the server is going to return to us. And I'm actually going to break that apart into the username and to a separate object called user roles. So let me shrink that up, come back into here, and we're going to say this class's username equals the data we got back, which that's that user security object we made earlier. And we'll grab the username. Then we'll say user roles equals result dot roles. Now, one really important thing has to happen here. How does a view model that might be looking for these roles know that it loaded? You can't just sit there and, I mean, I guess you could poll, have you changed, have you changed, have you changed? No, we're going to have an event. So earlier I showed you in the slides that there's this user security loaded. Okay, so what I'm going to do is basically raise the event. That way anyone who's listening goes, oh, okay, you got your data. Let's process the data. We can show and hide based on the roles. So in here, you'll notice right there is the name I'm going to call. And I'm just going to basically do a system event args empty. I just need to know that it loaded. Okay, and what that will do is simply raise the event right there. So very similar to iNotify property changed, just a custom event that I'm doing. That's what's going to let everyone know that, hey, the data's loaded. Now you're free to do whatever you want. Any future stuff that's loaded into screens dynamically, like user controls, they won't need to worry about the event if they didn't load first. They can just check that property and say, hey, has it already loaded? If it has, we're good to go. All right. Now the final thing I'm going to do in here is that little gotcha I caught that I told you about. How do you know if they have access to a specific screen in the app? Okay, it's easy to show and hide things. But how do you know that they actually have access to a screen? If you don't, you will get burnt, I promise you, because, well, I burnt myself, I guess. Luckily, I caught it before they did. But, I got thinking about it going, oh, that's not good. Okay, so I'm going to add a code snippet for this one because it's a little more involved. Security manager, check user access to URI. All right, so let's just briefly talk through this. It's a very simple one. This is not from the real app, but it'll get you started. What I'm going to do is every time the URI changes, now this is assuming the navigation framework. Some of you may just use the regular Silverlight application. Okay, but I'm going to assume that every time the URI changes, Okay, there's an event that fires with navigation framework called navigating. All right, and it lets you know that, hey, we're about to switch. We're going to move to this screen now. In that event, which I'll get to in a sec, we're going to go in and we're going to add a call to this guy, which is just does a really simple check. Hey, if they're hitting home, they have to be in the user role. User role's fine. If they go to the customer screen, they have to be in the isAdmin role. And then if they go to the about screen, they just have to be a user. Okay, so pretty basic right there. Now that could certainly be tweaked a whole bunch. We did with the real life app. But that's really important. I'll show you where it comes into play here in just a second. All right, so now what we're going to do is, now that we have the security manager defined, now we need to go into the view models and use that security manager, because we need to know what roles, what user name, and all that type of stuff. So what I like to do here is, how many doing MVVM right now? How many have like a view model base like this? Yeah, right? It's typically because we're all lazy and don't want to type notify property changed across all of our view models. But it's a great place to put security, because I want security to be built into the heart of my application. Well, the heart of my application is the view model base. Okay, it's the base class that all my view models inherit from if you're new to this. So what I'm going to do is what you see here. We're going to go into the view model base. I'm going to use, I use a little meth. Is anybody using meth in here at all? A big 3 of you. All right. For the rest of you, it's just a way to dynamically inject in pieces at runtime that I want to use. So I'm going to inject in my security manager. So we'll do that. Then I'm going to go into my main page. And in fact, we're actually going to do home page view model. And I'm going to add a call to my security manager to know when it's completed. Then you'll notice when it is completed, I'm going to go into the isAdmin and the username and set those to the view models, isAdmin and username, so that whatever's bound to those will get notified. I notify property changed. Typical standard Silverlight. All right. So let's do that. Let me switch back over. Okay, so we have our security manager ready. It can call the service. Good. We're on our way. Now we can come down into our view model base, and this is simple stuff. We can come in and say, I want to do an import, and I want to import the iSecurity Manager, and we're just going to call it Security Manager. All right, that's it. Now, if you're not familiar with MEF, basically what I'm telling this framework to do is please go find me any class in the project or in the solution that has iSecurity Manager as the interface. And then at runtime, please create it and inject it into that property right there. That's what MEF is doing. We won't go too much into that. It's just a kind of a dependency injection type thing. A little more dynamic. All right. Now that's pretty basic. What we're doing is now exposing our security manager to every view model. So standard stuff there. Now we'll come in and we'll start to actually use it. So let's come into our home view model. This is the home page that has that little drop-down looking thing. It's an autocomplete combo box, I call it. Our customers insisted that they can't just pick from a combo box. They want to type it or pick from the combo box. So if you guys need that, that'll be in the sample code. But we won't, that's a whole nother topic. So what I'm going to do is, when this homepage view model loads, this constructor ultimately is going to get hit right here. And I now need to check, has the security manager loaded or not? And so I'm going to make a call into here and say, if security manager is user security load complete, then let's do something. Else, we need to attach the event, because it hasn't loaded yet, and say, hey, when you do this, please let me know. So we'll say else security manager, and remember I had that event. So now we're going to say listen to the event and call this method here when it gets its data. So that's my flag. So first check the flag. If the flag is good, then just get to the data directly. Otherwise, we need to call into the event to get notified of this. So now what I'm going to do is say isEditor equals security manager dot isEditor. Now what this does is in the properties, these are just standard Silverlight properties. Here's my is editor, and you'll see I just do the on notify property change. So standard stuff that those who have been doing Silverlight very long will be pretty accustomed to. All right. And then we're done there. Now, what if they already have loaded the data by the time this gets called? Then we need to call that method. So I'm just going to kind of call it here real quick. All right. So now, if it's already loaded, we just jump right down and we set the editor. If it's not loaded, we attach to the event and listen. And then when it calls us back, we're now going to set the editor. Now we can show and hide things by simply binding to the is editor. So all I'm doing there is if I go into my home XAML in the views, just a normal Silverlight data binding here. So pretty standard type. So let me go to full screen XAML for you. Maybe. All right. So let me scroll down. You'll see a stack panel here that has a button and an add and a remove button. Basically, if you're not an editor, I don't want you to be able to click those buttons, so I'm going to hide them if you're not in the editor role. So the way I'm doing that is simply binding the visibility of that stack panel to the is editor property you just saw. And then I'm using a value converter to convert the Boolean to a visibility collapsed or expanded type thing. So that's again, pretty standard data binding there. Okay, so now we're all set up because now, based on what I have, we can run this, hopefully, since there's a lot of pieces to it, but we'll try it. And it'll call the service, it'll get my data back, and then we can bind those properties into my XAML and show and hide things. That doesn't stop people from navigating directly, though, right? That just shows and hides things. Well, you get a clever person, yeah, they don't see the link, but they download the Zap, inspect it. There you go. You can figure it out pretty easy. So let me let's see where we're at here so far. I'm a big believer in build often. So hopefully we get succeeded. All right, good. So it looks like we're pretty good there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm using the navigation framework here. How many have used, just so I know, the navigation framework in here? Okay, quite a few of you. How many are just using the standard one and dynamically loading in regions? Okay, so about the same. How many are going, I don't even know yet? No, you don't have to raise your hand. The navigation framework, if you're new to this, is a nice way to easily load different screens into a frame. Literally, it's like going back to the old days. For those that have been doing this a while, sadly I have. I'm getting up there in age. And you remember back in the day we had iframes or frames were like all the rage. Now, keep in mind that was like in the 90s. But, hey, it was a pretty big deal back then. Actually, that's what Silverlight does if you do the navigation framework. It actually has a frame that you can tell it to load in different items. So you remember on the security manager, let's go back to that really quick. Remember I had this guy, check user access to URI? Well, what I can do is when the navigating event fires of the frame, when they're trying to go to a different screen, I can now check, hey, are you allowed to go to that screen? And so let me put in the code for that guy. All right, so all this is going to do is say, hey, if you're not a valid user, which probably you wouldn't have logged in the system, but I was kind of being paranoid, just in case, then let's just cancel the navigation entirely. I mean, you're not even a valid user at this point, so out you go, right? No navigation for you. Okay, otherwise, I'm going to come up and say, let's go to the security manager, check user access to, and whenever the frame changes, you get this event args guy right there, navigating cancel event args. And what I'm doing is using that to get to what is the name of the view that they're trying to call, that they're trying to click on. Okay, if based on the roles that are in the security manager, if they have access to that view, great, we're going to let them pass. If they don't have access, we're going to show this really fancy, I put a lot of time into this screen, called access denied. It's amazing. Brace yourselves. Oh, yeah. Now, this would be a good example of the media element, because here's what you could do. You know, everybody's seen Jurassic Park, probably. You could play that little, you know, with the media element, and then now you can say you use some media in your Silverlight app. All right. So moving on. That's what that guy does. That's the piece I initially was missing because I just didn't think about that. Now if you go in and type this stuff and type in the URI, if they don't have access, now I do because I'm an admin on my groups. That's how I set it up. But if I didn't, then even if they can't see the link and they type it, they still can't get to it. They'll see the access denied page. You know, at that point you could say, hey, you're a hacker and we just reported you and blah, 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 blah. So, because that means they were, if they got to this, that means they were dinking around where they shouldn't be, generally. All right, so let's do one more build here and let's see where we're at with it. I think I got all the pieces. I have a step, do this, and I think I hit everything. It builds. That's good enough for me. Any questions? No, just kidding. All right, let's try it out, and then I'm going to purposely try to break some things here to end, and then we'll take questions. So let's run it, and let's see where we're at. All right, that's correct. Only one failure. Now, there's two services being called. There's a data service and a security service. That was, believe it or not, desired. Let me show you why. This is where it gets a little tricky. So let me run that again. And you can see that one of the calls, which is out to the, let's see if it has it down here, security proxy, failed. Why? This is one you will spend, unless you know WCF really well, a long time trying to figure out. You'll pop up Fiddler, you'll look at the message traffic and go, that didn't help. You'll look at the logs, nothing there, you know, and you'll just be like, oh my gosh, what is going on? Let me show you. Luckily, it's an easy fix once you know. Back on the server, when I created the service, it created this security service binding. This is the standard Silverlight binding. Anybody's been doing this a while, you've seen this. Okay, notice the top one says custom binding right there. See that HTTP transport authentication scheme? Kind of a critical piece. If you don't have that, it won't actually call your service. So let me come into here. We're going to add that. That's the missing piece. Now that's one of those needle in the haystack things. Because you'd be sitting there debugging your code all day long, setting breakpoints, and it still doesn't work. Going, what is wrong? That's what's wrong. Or at least that's what should be wrong, I hope. So otherwise I missed something else. But let's go ahead and run that. We'll log in. And hopefully we'll see you. There we go. So we see username up there. This customers, you have to be an editor role to see customers. Okay, and I can go to customers and it works. No big deal there. And I can get to all my data. Because I'm an admin or an editor, I can also see these buttons. Okay, if I was not, which I'd have to log out, unfortunately, to change my my groups on my machine, which I'm not going to do that live. Then I would not see those. I would literally be able to pick a customer. I'd have text boxes, or you could change them. And that's all you would see. And you'll see that I can submit it. I get a little success message, and we're done. Validation works. Let's put in a 0 here. And oops, something went wrong. And you get the idea. Okay. So now I have access to the username. I have roles built in, and I'm good to go. And in fact, even the About page has a role, you saw. You'll notice up top here, if I try to type in, right now it's home, I'm going to type in customers. If you can't see it, it's just customers. Hit enter, I can get right to it. If I was not in the admin role, that would give me that access denied error. Okay, but I am. All right, so to wrap up here, those are a couple things you would need to know. That's all going to be in the sample code. I'll have that up on my blog hopefully in the next 30 minutes, which I'll give you that link coming up. I got one more really cool thing to show you that you will beat your head against the wall like I did, because it is a new product, but it is awesome. How many of you use IIS Express? Okay, very few. Okay, IIS Express is something you should install. If you're doing WCF or ASMX services and you're using Cassini, you're doing what I call faking it, because it always works well with Cassini for the most part. Then you move it over to your real box, like an IIS 7 or 7.5 box, and everything just goes to pot, you know, and you're like, why? Well, let me show you why. Couple tricks. This will just give me about 3 minutes here. So I'm going to right-click on my web app, and you'll notice because I have IIS Express installed, I have a Use IIS Express. What that's going to do now is give me the full functionality of IIS. Okay, but not the full IIS still, but it is. It's like a quasi-full IIS. So I'm going to hit use it. That's going to say, do you want to create a website for this project? So I don't even have to run out to the IIS admin console or anything. I can do it right here, and it creates it for me. Now, what's really important here is the next one that pops up. Well, of course, it had to give me a big one. 16331 is my port. Here's why that's important. What is the proxy that was generated? Where's the code by default stored? The service references client config, which is port 1660. I promise you this will not work if we run it, and you will beat your head against the wall going, why? All I did was switch to IIS Express. You're on a different port. Okay? Down here, let me just run it, and I'll show you, because I need IIS Express to show up in my, my tool area down there. We should get a bunch of failures here. There we go. It's the only time in a demo that I like to see those. Okay, here's what's going on. Here's IIS Express, this little icon. If I right-click on it, I could say Show All Applications. I have one, Silverlight Demos. I have a link to the config, but it shows me the port is 16331. Please remember that for me, 16331. So now we're going to come into here, 16331. If I do a typo, yell. Okay. Now let's run it. Right? Should be good now, right? We changed the port. We're running IIS Express. Everything's cool. We got full IIS going. Let's see what happens. Oh, man. Looks even worse. Right? Not good. Now, hopefully, by the way, you would handle these errors. But I wanted to show, it's kind of hard to demo this without those. So, a couple things we got to do. And we'll wrap up here. First off, we are now using IIS. And right now, IIS is defaulting to anonymous. It's not actually using Windows. Normally, you go in and check that box, you know, if you're in IIS 6 or in 7, you click on the icon and change it. So at the bottom, I have a little bit of code specific to IIS. And what I'm doing is I'm disabling anonymous through the config file though, which is awesome. Disabling basic, disabling anonymous, and then I'm enabling Windows authentication. You got to have that because what's happening, the errors are coming from the server doesn't have an account to work with. And yet I'm trying to get those roles. Again, build some try catches, but now it's still not going to work though if I run it. So I need to show you a real quick tip that I found very useful. If you go back to Show All Applications and click on yours in IIS Express, again, you'll see this little icon down in your tray. Just click on it. It gives you the path to a config. Don't worry about it. I'm going to show you. I'll show you where that lives. It's in My Documents, IIS Express, config. Okay? And here's what you have to do. I'm just going to do this really quick here because it's not security, but it is, because unless you run it on this, you're really not testing your app if you're using Cassini. Because it will work on Cassini. Okay, if I scroll down to the Windows security area, anonymous authentication, Windows authentication, basic authentication, notice that there's this override mode default, allow, allow, and allow. That wasn't there before. Anonymous was on as default, and these were all locked down to deny. So even if I went into web config, I couldn't override those. That's the first thing you got to change. Okay, and again, this will be something you'll just search for Windows authentication and you'll find it. If you come on down, in fact, let me do what I just said. Windows auth, and let's search. There we go. Right now, Windows auth is off, but I turned it on, right, in web config, so we should be okay. But notice this guy right here, that there's two providers added, Negotiate and NCLM. And there's others. There's Kerberos, there's Digest. You can do all these Windows security modes, right? Well, what's going on here is we are currently NCLM, if you remember. Remember, I had to change that. It's not going to work, so I'm going to copy that. And what we have to do is go back into our web config. This is the not fun part, I have to admit. I probably shouldn't end with this, but it's real life, so hopefully it's of use. And I need to change these guys to negotiate. Okay, because that was the first provider defined. Otherwise, you'll get an error with this. Okay, the other thing I'm going to do is, if we come down, you'll find that unless you set up your metadata, your WSDL endpoint properly, which I'm not going to take the time to do, that will also make it fail. So I'm going to comment that guy out in both places. Okay, now there is a way to enable the MEX endpoint, and I have a little code snippet that'll be in the download for you that shows how to do that if you want to enable the WSDL endpoint. But right now, we have to take that out, or that won't work either. These are all the things that you'll get this nasty error, but you won't know why you got the nasty error. This is some of the things you have to know about. Let me make sure I got everything here. Negotiate. Let's try it out and see where we're at. We should be close. We'll run it, and it works. Okay, so now we're up and running, and now we're on a real IIS box, in essence, IIS Express. Okay, so all that code will be in the download for you, as well as the slides. Let me switch back over now that you've seen the whole picture here, and we will wrap up. We saw that, and I'm going the wrong way, aren't I? Let's go to here. Okay, we did that. We're here. So I hope, especially if you came into this and we're kind of going, I'm not sure how I'm going to get security in. Number one, I hope you'll go download the code base, because this will give you a huge jump start over doing it from scratch. I also hope that you can see that it's not like it's rocket science. It's just a matter of understanding the fundamentals of, hey, Silverlight doesn't let me do it. Okay, fine. Let's find a workaround. We'll call a service. We'll get the service, and then we're going to use that security manager to track our roles. Now, if you guys want the code, let me go here. There's where you can get it. So if you want to make a note of that, if you're on Twitter, feel free to hook up there as well. But weblogs.asp.net/dwallin, and that will give you the code that you might want to work with. And I'll have that up hopefully in the next 30 minutes or so. I'll run right back to get on the internet and get that up real soon. I didn't put it up because I didn't know what their policy was on publishing stuff before the session. Or some of you might not have shown up. You're like, oh, I got the code. Forget him, So, which I don't blame you, Now that you sat through this, yeah. All right. So anyway, I hope that helps you guys understand the premise of working with this. That's all I have for you. Please do fill out the evals if you could. I hope it was useful for you. And that is it. So thanks a lot.